What's going on, guys? Today I will be installing this inclinometer and showing you how to do it without anything from this wire harness. The only thing that you really need is this little white plug, which I have a link in the description where you can buy this little plug for $3, because that's the only thing other than wires out of this whole harness that you need to install this. So I'm going to show you how to do it. I'm going to lay out a little wire diagram and what wires you need to connect into this blue connector. That was good. I know. I'm actually impressed myself that I caught that on camera. But I'm going to show you where to connect the pins between this blue connector and that white connector. Because this blue connector, it's only for the clock and the inclinometer. That's the only thing that it goes to. The rest of this harness is speaker wire, antenna wire. It's all things that you don't need. So you're going to spend $100 on this thing when all you need is that little white plug and 3 feet of wire from a junkyard. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Everything will be laid out in chapters. If you look at the progress bar of this video, you can click on certain sections to jump throughout the video to different points so that you can see where I'm cutting a hole in the dash and what you have to do, which some people might not want to do that. That might turn you away from this video. So you have to cut a hole in your dash. That's going to happen. If you have a two-wheel drive FJ Cruiser, I would look for this blue connector. You want to look and you want to make sure that the other connector that plugs into the blue connector, that there are more wires going into it than that are coming out of it. Because if you look at this one on your FJ Cruiser right now, you're going to have 4 wires coming out of this blue plug. Those 4 wires only go to this little clock. If your two-wheel drive FJ Cruiser only has 4 wires going into the other plug that plugs onto this one, and then 4 wires coming out of the backside, you would pretty much be installing an inclinometer, but the vehicle doesn't know how to control it. I don't know if the two-wheel drive models came with an option for an inclinometer. So if you have a two-wheel drive model, do this at your own risk. Don't cut a hole in your dash just yet. I'll show you a little bit later in the video how to see if you have the wires for this. This harness replaces the one that you have on your FJ Cruiser. If you don't have an inclinometer installed, this has your clock plug, the front driver's side tweeter that's on the dash, passenger side tweeter, and your antenna wire. The speaker wires go into this white plug, which we're not messing with. This is just gonna get thrown away. I mean, this is like $100, but if you buy this, you really just have to strip all of this off to where you only have the white and the black connector and the blue connector. I'm gonna lay it out on the bench and I'm gonna cut it up exactly how you need to cut it up. And on mine, I'm actually going to depin this connector that came on this harness, completely remove all of this that you already have on your FJ Cruiser, and then add these extra wires to the existing plug that's in the FJ Cruiser for the inclinometer. And I'm actually gonna have a little diagram popping up on the screen that shows what wires go into the blue plug on your FJ Cruiser and where those wires go to on this little white plug. This white plug, you can buy this from, I have the website down in the description, but it's an Australian website that they sell. It's the only website that I could find that just sells these individually. The other websites, you had to buy at least 10. Why do you need 10? So you may be asking yourself, how do you make your own wire harness for this? That seems kind of complicated. It's actually not that complicated in terms of wiring harnesses, because it can get pretty complicated if you're wiring up an engine, but that's not what we're doing. We're only installing an inclinometer, and we're putting 8 pins into one little connector, which is the white connector that goes into the inclinometer, and putting the other 8 pins into the blue connector that's on the FJ Cruiser. The wires you can get from a junkyard, your local junkyard, from a 2000 to a 2010 Toyota. This is the wire harness that I have. This is from a 2003 RAV4. The pins that Toyota used on the ECU are the same pins that we need to go onto this harness. Right, I got this wire harness laid out here, my razor knife with the new razor blade, so I want to be very careful that I don't care about cutting these pink, purple, green, blue wires or the antenna wire, because all that's coming off. What I don't want to cut are these 12 wires that go from the black and white connector to this blue connector. And for this, since I know that these wires are on this side and I don't mind damaging them, I'm actually cutting this on this side just to get it started. Same thing, since I know that the pink, purple, blue, green wires are on this side where my finger is, I'm cutting here. Didn't cut wires, I just cut tape. So this blue section is completely separated. This section of harness is completely separated. So I have, these are not cut in any way. I'm just going to clean this up and take the foam off and everything. but I'm going to rewrap this with tape so that the wires aren't free and able to move around. So if you want to try to go the cheap route and buy this connector online along with 8 of these wires that go from here to here, and this is 3 feet, I will measure it exactly. The amount of wire that you will need is roughly 33.5 inches. The clock wires are over here, and the inclinometer wires are over here. So looking at the back of this, so you have this one that's ground, that's going to the clock, and you have red, gray, and green. Those are all going to the clock. All of these other ones, I will be pulling out one by one out of the back of this connector and sliding into the blue connector that's already on the FJ Cruiser. So getting back, let me do this. That's from something else, a little piece of paper, just doing wiring on something else. So there's these little grooves on this white tab here, and then here. This plastic part doesn't come up all the way, but it comes up just enough to where it releases the hold that's on these pins. There's a little locking mechanism that I have to stick the probe in at this angle and then pry this way so that it releases the plastic tab that's holding this pin. So I'm basically, I have my hand on the little, this is a purple wire with a red stripe. So the purple wire with the red stripe, and it's 5 over. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I go in at an angle, pry down, and it slides right out. And then putting it back in is the same thing. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as far over as it was. And then you hear it pop. And this is undamaged. See, it's still sturdy. This is slightly damaged a little bit. I've rounded out this hole, but this hole doesn't matter. Whenever you put the connector, the other side of the connector onto this, it slides into this hole to make the connection. I wouldn't suggest doing this to every one of the pins at the same time. If you're doing what I'm doing and you're trying to swap over from this blue connector, one pin at a time, so this one and then all of these other wires, I'm going to do the same thing. It's just probably going to take most 30 minutes to swap all of these out. But you can see looking at this, so this is the pin, that little plastic clip snaps into there. And this is the side that the electrical connector goes into whenever it makes the connection. So you're not sticking the probe inside of this, weakening anything. You're sticking the probe down here inside this plastic thing. I have the donor harness up here. So these are the 2 different types, mostly the 2 different. There are other types of electrical connectors that are in Toyota vehicles, but these are 2 different types. So this is one, and this is, you see the pins are larger. This type of connector is in the black pin, the black plug for the clock. So if for whatever reason you have to change yours, I don't know. Yeah, so these pins are for the clock. For the inclinometer, it uses these type, the smaller ones, which are on here. So I want to pull those out. So I'm going to go through this RAV4 harness and just pull out a bunch of pins, because this harness I'm actually not going to be using or selling for another RAV4. I'm using it in my IS300. I'll be extending my factory harness with this one. So using this one to extend and then relocate my, my ECU. So it's probably going to be a video on that. I've got 4 of these wires out, and it's only taken me a few minutes to do so. And so you need to get 16 of these out because you need 16 of these pins. You don't need 16 wires. You really need, so you could get away with going with a 1.5 feet away from this plug, because you would just end up wiring these in the middle. But the problem with that is you'll have the solder joint in the middle of the wire, so you'd have to pay very close attention to which pin you're attaching where in this side of the connector and this side of the connector, because you would have 2 very different wire colors. So try to keep the wire colors the same. You have pink one here and a pink one here, like, well, I could put the 2 pink ones together. Or if I have these yellow ones, these 2 yellow ones, I could wire those together. 2 green ones here, blue ones, right? So you'd want to keep the wire colors as close as possible. Now at this point, if you have one of these wire harnesses and you just did what I did and you cut everything off of it, and you didn't have to go to a junkyard and then, you know, find a Toyota wire harness and cut that section off and order the white plug, and if you didn't have to do all of that, then at this point you have 2 options. You can either install this completely as it is, because you probably wouldn't have popped this pin out as I did. So you can put the pin back in there. I'm not going to snap that back in because I don't want to dig it back out. You could take this, you can plug this blue connector in where your other blue connector is. You can fish this up behind your radio, plug this into your clock, and then plug this into your inclinometer. Or you can do what I'm going to do. This is a little bit more involved, but basically I'm going to take every one of these pins out of this blue connector and I'm going to switch them over one by one to the other blue connector that's in the FJ Cruiser. The factory clock wire, this is going to get thrown away, and I'll use my existing factory clock wire that's in the FJ Cruiser. That way the only wire that I have to run is this one. This will be the only extra wire in my FJ Cruiser setup. It's a little bit more involved, but I like it like this because there are less wires out and about in the FJ Cruiser in random places. So it's more compact. This is the only extra section of wire that I'll have. I'll just have to dress it up and make sure that these wires don't rub somewhere that they're not supposed to. This is where the wire harness is, and this is obviously your glove box was right here. It just, once you fold it down, this little shock thing that's for the side of the glove box, it really just snaps onto the side. So you just unsnap it off the side, and then you can fold the glove box all the way down, and you slide it off of these two little hooks here, and then it falls down. There's a screw that's right up there. That's the only screw that you need to remove this after the glove box is out. So this is the blue connector that we'll be working with. You notice it has a bunch of wires going in the back of it, and all these are the wires that go into the inclinometer. But coming out of the other side that goes to what would be the inclinometer, there's nothing. Pull it out. So this has just 4 wires coming out of it. I'm ready to start taking the pins out of this connector and popping them into the same location on this connector. But first, the thing that I have to do, because the pins won't slide in unless this is pried down, and I should use my screwdriver, because if I use something like this little probe, it's actually going to bend up this little plastic piece. Got my little Radio Shack screwdriver. Who misses the expensive Radio Shack stuff that they used to have? Okay, so that's pried up. This is one of the things where you need to double check and triple check every time you take a wire out of this connector and you put it into this connector. You need to take extreme caution if you're doing the same thing that I'm doing. I'll start with this red blue one first. And that was 2 over on the bottom. So I need to snap it in up here. 2 over on the bottom. Yellow with a red stripe. Last wire. This is no longer needed. But what I want to do, since I just switched all the pins over, is I want to go through my little diagram that I drew out, and I'm going to double check everything. Looks like all the wires are in the right spot. Before I cut a hole in my dash and I snake this up there, I want to plug in the inclinometer. I want to test it out so that it works. If I have a bad inclinometer, I'll be cutting a hole in the dash to install a bad inclinometer. And obviously I want to plug this blue connector back in because it's not going to work if I don't. Moment of truth. All right, outside temperature, 91 degrees, that's accurate. Compass, it's blinking, so I guess it's wanting to calibrate. There's calibration instructions that you have to go through on this, so that's probably why the compass is blinking. Calibration instructions will be at the end of this. If you did get your wires from a junkyard and you ended up soldering 2 wire ends together and you've got multiple colors going from here to here, it's still going to work, but you have to take extra caution whenever you're running a wire from here to here. If you plug a ground wire or a power wire in where there's supposed to be a sensor signal, then you're talking about potentially frying your car's computer, because I'm pretty sure this ties into the factory ECU. That would be a very costly repair, which is why you need to double and triple check everywhere that your wires go in. Draw out a little paper like I did. It took 5 minutes for me to draw this out. Now, this is all taped up, it's dressed up, all nice and neat. So I'm going to fish it up behind the dash and over feel the radio. Just push it over underneath my radio so that whenever I pull the center console out, I can fish this out the rest of the way. Fed them up underneath the radio. So I'm going to pop this all back together. I don't know what this plug is. It was just out and dangling. And there's another little green plug over here that I didn't have connected to anything. It's just kind of there. So don't be worried if you see those and they're disconnected. And you don't forget your little shock on this side. So if you don't know how to remove this, there's a screw under there and a screw on the other side in the same location that this one is. Take those out, pull this up. There's a screw here and on the other side also. Then you take those two screws out and then you can pull this whole assembly off. And then once you do that, there's 4 10mm bolts that are around the radio, and the radio comes out. And then that is where I will be plugging in the inclinometer after I cut a hole in the dash. All right, so I have this out on my workbench, and as you can see, I have this little plastic Tupperware thing, right? This is like a Rubbermaid lid from some container that I don't have anymore, Sterilite. So this is sponsored by Sterilite, not really. So I made the markings on my friend's FJ Cruiser that I got the inclinometer from, and made all the measurements and everything, and pretty much drew this and cut this out based off of the hole that was in his FJ Cruiser. So these two holes, this one there's a plastic snap that looks like it should go in to hold this metal bracket in place here. But his didn't have the plastic snaps that would be there, and you don't really need them because on this. But I would recommend cutting it the first time in something like this, and also because there's AC ducts that are directly underneath where you'll be drilling. This is just like the dog poo pickup bags, the little rollers that are that the bags are around. So I just used those and put them around my drill bit so that I only go down that far and then it stops. So I only go in as far as the hole is and then it stops. So whenever I put this on my drill, I don't have to worry about going into the ducts. So that's my little stopper. The measurements for the width of this go between here and here, and that was, I think, 98mm exactly. So, and that is about 85mm. This hole and this hole, center to center, is 19 centimeters to the edge. So center of the hole, so that's 4.5 centimeters. And then over here, center of the hole to the edge, same thing. So before I start cutting and everything, I want to show all the measurements for this so that it sits. And the way that I did mine, I want it to sit in where it's just behind this lip, because not really a lip, but where the dash has like an upward slope and then it flattens out. So that I want my gauges sitting just behind that. And what I did is I measured back on the bottom of this so that my gauges are pretty much going to come to about a 1/4 inch from that. I'm cutting this to where it's 40mm back is where the hole starts, where that first little thing on the bottom here presses against the dash and keeps it from shifting around. So this is 40mm back where the hole starts, and that's 1 9/16 of an inch. And then from the edge of this hole all the way to the edge of this compartment on this side and that side, it's 15.5 centimeters roughly. That's and that's about 6 1/8 of an inch. And the hole, like I said, from here to here, that's 85mm. So from this arrow that I have, and that arrow marks where that tab on the bottom of the inclinometer sits. So that's the most important measurement. That's why I put that arrow there, and then these arrows here that are spread out around the side. So from this arrow back to where this arrow is, that is 85mm. And then from here to here, like I said earlier, that's 98mm. So I am going to start cutting now, and at this point, it's pretty much the point of no return. I could turn around right now, and I would still have a complete dash, but I want the inclinometer installed. Okay, so according to the manual that's in the glove box on page 186 and 187, it says everything that you need to do to set this, but it's basically you hold down the set button and then it tells you what zone that you're in. And then when you press the set button again, it starts doing this circle thing, and that is when you're supposed to drive around in a circle. And the book also says if you don't have room to drive around in the circle, then just drive around the block. And this should find the zone that you're in based off of that. So right now it says that I'm in zone 8, which is central US, and I'm not in central US, I'm in Hawaii. So if this circle calibration fails, then it's supposed to show ER, I guess, where this circle is going around. And right now I'm not trying to calibrate it, I'm just sitting still in the garage, but I'll calibrate it later. Right, so this is pretty much it. All I have left to do is to calibrate the compass, as I was saying a second ago. This is the plastic piece that I cut out of this thing, and this was pretty easy to cut with a sharp razor blade. I only took probably 15 minutes cutting out that little box. I know I time-lapsed this section of the video, but that's it for this video, though. Thanks a lot for watching this video, guys. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, check out my other videos. I'm literally coming up on my 40th FJ Cruiser video. That's about 40 videos that are somewhat like this one, whether I'm installing lifts, talking about my tires, putting the fender flares on, lights, wiring, air horn, bumper, winch, all of that stuff. I have videos on all of that stuff. So if you liked this video, then check out those other videos. You might like them also. I'm getting better at my editing skills as time goes on, so the editing on those videos is not quite as good as this one, and my editing is still not that great, but it's slowly getting better. But if you've watched until this point, thank you. And yeah, God bless you guys.